Hello and welcome to Catholic Unscripted, episode 19. I'm Catherine Bennett.
I'm Mark Lambert.
I'm Gavin Ashenden.
Sorry we haven't been with you for the last couple of weeks. There's a couple of news stories we want to look at today, and the first one is about the cancellation of Calvin Robinson, which I know, Gavin, you've written about. So Calvin had planned to record an Easter message on GB News at Warwick Street Church, but the choir, members of the choir, or one member or many, we don't know, objected to his coming, and then his appearance was cancelled. Can you tell us about that? Give us the fuller picture, Gavin.
I can, but actually, if everyone who wants to hear it in Calvin's own words, he was interviewed by Michael Voris just a few days ago. And it's 6 minutes towards the end. He gives the exact picture here. He was asked to go and speak to the young people's group at Warwick Street. There's one at the Oratory as well, which I've been asked to. I don't think I'll be asked to go to the Warwick Street young people's group, but and it went down very well. They loved him, and I think after that, the implication is that he either asked or was invited to have his GB News Easter presentation there. He did a Christmas one at the Oratory, and it was just brilliant. It was one of the best things on television. I was in it, so I would think that, but it still was anyway. And the thought that he was going to do an Easter one is really very, very exciting. And I was so pleased it was going to happen at Warwick Street because, you know, although it's slightly tedious when Anglicans borrow Catholic backdrops, as they do all the time, what's not to like? It gets to promote the depth of spirituality that the Catholic Church has. And however, Warwick Street has a professional choir. I don't know how many of them are practicing Catholics. I don't know how many of them are heterosexual, bisexual, straight, non-binary, no idea. But they didn't like Calvin and they complained. And so either Father Mark Smith and or the Ordinary Monsignor Newton cancelled it within days. They were about to start shooting. So this was really problematic for GB News professionally and very embarrassing for Calvin. And so when Calvin asked why, he was presented, I mean, there were two obvious, well, there was one obvious reason. The obvious reason was Calvin's become very publicly acclaimed for his defense of heterosexual marriage. His Oxford Union speech on marriage has got over 500,000 hits. And I've heard him say to somebody that the clips of it have gone around and are 3 or 4 million. It's just huge. People have been very grateful to have it, simply have the facts described. So it would be sensible to think that the choir cancelled him because they were not of the marrying kind. They were not a heterosexual bastion of appreciation, and they found his defense of heterosexual marriage difficult. That would be very alarming if that was the case, because if the clergy of Warwick Street had given way to the choir on that matter, they would essentially have been defending a gay cabal who were insisting upon the triumph of the woke against Catholic teaching. So they say they didn't do that, which is great. I mean, no one has said they did. We just asked the question, and they said they didn't. They instead referred to an article that Calvin written about Enoch Powell. Enoch Powell's notorious. He gets people very twitchy. This takes us into the whole leftish business of guilt by association. Calvin, I don't think I could write about Enoch Powell because I'm white, but Calvin's black or he's coloured, so he thinks he can, and why shouldn't he? So he looked at Enoch Powell and immigration. His main point was to say that untrammeled immigration is bad for the church because it's importing a lot of Islam and diminishing the glue of Christianity in our culture. I think someone's allowed to say that. The clergy at Warwick Street said just the fact that you even got Enoch Powell in a headline, which sub-editors say, it's always the subs who do this, the subs give the headlines, as the three of us know from our own Catholic Herald stuff. The subs said, you know, where Enoch Powell is right or something like that. And so the clergy cancelled him. So either they cancelled him for political prejudice or they cancelled him for Catholic social teaching. Either way, it's pretty bad. and the reason it's bad for Calvin, it's bad manners, it's bad ethics, it's bad integrity. But it's particularly bad because Calvin's doing a very, very good job about presenting Jesus. And if you're in love with Jesus, you want that to happen. So Calvin contacted me and said, I've been cancelled. Would you write about this for me? And I said, Calvin, I can't, because I've had a little excitement with the Ordinariate myself. and I don't want to be seen to be doing this out of revenge or bad faith. So I'm really sorry, I can't do it. I won't do it. So he went to another journalist, Jules Gomez. Jules did it. He did it very fairly. He phoned up Monsignor Newton. He phoned up Father Mark. He put their quotes in, and I then did write an opinion piece on it, because it was out there in the public space, and I had opinions. Interestingly enough, it's got to nearly 70,000 in 5 days. However, two responses in the Ordinariate. I hope Mark will say more about this now. One, some of the Ordinariate clergy said, "Oi, stop bashing us. We're precious, we're splendid, we're nice. You don't need to do this to us. Don't be horrid." I've had really quite a number of letters from lay Ordinariate members saying, "We're absolutely disgusted, and we're writing to Monsignor Newton to say so. What does he think he's doing in our name?" Mark, over to you, the bigger picture.
Well, I've heard from quite a few members of the Ordinariate as well who have been disappointed by what's happened. And I think that is, it is such a shame. But at the same time, I think it's important to say that, like, certainly for lay Catholics, we've felt that the Ordinariate has been a wonderful thing for the church in England, and has been kind of the seat of orthodoxy. So it is really difficult for me to sort of, because I can totally see that this is it's like a systemic problem, isn't it? And it's not something that we just see in the Ordinariate. It's something that's very prevalent throughout the church. And I think it was summed up very well in Calvin's interview with Voris, where he said that every single bishop in England and Wales had been written to ask to take part in the debate defending the Catholic understanding of marriage or Christian marriage, and no one had the courage to stand up and get involved in that debate. So you had this young guy and Dr. Ian Paul as well, and there was someone else, I don't know who the other guy was, who were basically defending marriage against 3 Anglican men pretending to be bishops. That's right, was it 3 Anglican? So, which is just appalling that the bishops are doing that, and that we haven't really got anyone with any authority who's prepared to stand up and talk about it. But as a very high-ranking member of the clergy said to me some time ago, no one's going to go near the gay issue. No, and that is such a sad indictment that no one has got the courage to actually stand up for what the church teaches, and it makes me feel very, very sad for the people who are so confused and don't understand. Everyone has got some sort of level of awareness about church teaching on these issues, but our bishops, their office is to teach us, and yet they won't touch this with a barge pole.
I think what's a real shame is what a lost opportunity it is, and you see this time and again. It's something we saw with the John Fisher scandal last year. If you remember the school in South London that invited in an author who declared that he was a homosexual man, and he was going to read from a book he had written, which included a gay parody of the Lord's Prayer that was really very blasphemous. And for this reason, it was considered inappropriate. It was a safeguarding matter. But the narrative...
I think it's important to say it was smutty, wasn't it?
It was
Catherine?
smutty.
If it was
absolutely,
heterosexual, you'd have had a problem.
It was exactly so. So that's my point. In other words, it was vulgar. If it was heterosexual, it would have been. It was pornographic. So my point is that he was not cancelled because he was a homosexual man, but this is the narrative that went out, and the church stood up and said, no, this author reading this text to young people is inappropriate. And I think the same sort of thing here is happening in Warwick Street. If they have concerns about something that Calvin has said, and they're saying that it's about his piece on Enoch Powell, then isn't it possible to have a conversation to see what it was that he said? But it's just the shutting down of people. There are things that you cannot say, and if there's any association at all, that's just the end of the conversation. That's really problematic. And anyway, it's questionable whether it really was about that or something else. But as you say, it's this inability to. You would have thought people would be able to speak about it and say, okay, we think there's a problem here. Let's dialogue. But no, it's
as Catholics, you'd hope that we could disagree better, couldn't you?
Yes.
And that that if there was a problem like that perhaps Monsignor Keith would have got everyone together and had a little conversation or something, tried to work out our differences. It doesn't,
because there's no movement.
It's not well done, is it?
No.
I can understand Monsignor Keith's position. I can articulate it for a moment. There's always been a very uneasy relationship between choirs, especially professional choirs, particularly in cathedrals and headquarters of liturgy, where the choir are relied on to produce exquisite beauty in order to promote the whole cult of sanctity and holiness. And they do it very well. I've got theological questions about whether beautiful praise has a spiritual currency when it's sung by atheists who are doing it for art's sake. But this is a very complicated metaphysical question, and I've been struggling with the whole of my life, and I don't want to go there. But I can well understand why at Warwick Street it would have seemed very important to keep the singers on side in order to go on producing a very beautiful mass, of course. But increasingly, I think, and I apologize for saying this in advance, increasingly the parallel for me is of 1930s Germany. Because at the beginning in 1930s Germany, there were all kinds of very good reasons for dealing with immigration, social solidarity, the rebuilding of the German nation, social cohesion, economic renewal. There are all kinds of reasons for buying into what the government were doing, all of which were good in themselves or presented as good. But they were going to go out of control and produce something profoundly destructive to Christendom and to democracy. Well, the same thing is happening now. What we discovered, you only have to look at the whole trans activists aiming to get our children. We said 4 or 5 years ago they'd come for our children. The Chicago Men's Gay Choir said we're coming for your children. Nobody paid any much attention, and here they are. There is a direct line between the gayification of society and the sexualization of children. So that to the extent that in infant schools, the new regulations about sexual awareness and information require the sexualization of children in a way that most parents would find abhorrent. So this is not an isolated issue. It's part of a joined up program to destabilize our society, to legitimize sex as a form of social currency that's got completely out of control as far as Christians are concerned. And my fear is that the nice people we live amongst in the church, which including the bishops, are still being fooled into seeing this as a matter of the religion of nice and the religion of inclusion. Let us not drive people away who are different or who are struggling. It really isn't anything like that anymore. We're facing an enormously serious ideological assault on Christian anthropology, and the effects of it are immensely corrosive and deeply serious, not just on our children, but on marriages, on the whole concept of marriage, and even on employment for Christians. You can't have our views and be employed safely. So I think that I understand the dilemma that Father Mark and Monsignor Keith were in. I think they made the wrong call. But having made the wrong call and been invited to be accountable by some of the people to whom they should be accountable, Calvin's owed an apology. And my concern is, I'm not going after the Ordinariate. I love it. I hugely respect it. I want to protect it. But you need to make an apology when you know you've got things wrong.
Yeah, I think that's important, isn't it? That we remember what the Ordinariate is set up for. And obviously it's something that you in particular would treasure, that the Anglican patrimony or that English Catholic patrimony sort of thing.
Of course.
So I think, I said to you before, I worry that we sometimes with these things that we end up being a sort of circular firing squad where we're picking on issues, but that's not to in any way invalidate, the facts of this case. But it's difficult, isn't it? And moving on directly, it's the assault on marriage that is the problem. And one of the things that moved me was how well Calvin articulated just the fact that there's a real difference between relationships when the net result of those relationships is children, and if you're in a sexual relationship for fun or company, whether that's heterosexual or homosexual or whatever, it's a very different thing, isn't it? You know, to the building block, the fundamental building block of society, which is, you know, a heterosexual marriage. And I don't see us valuing that, and I don't see us extolling the virtue of that. Exactly because, as you say, we're so frightened of, making people feel bad, and that is surely where you're getting to. There is a fracture in our thought, because we're moving away from rational thought, and we're moving towards something that's based on feelings all the time. And obviously, feelings can be easily manipulated by the enemy, and we have to be aware of that, don't we?
I think Calvin's incredibly brave in what he does and in the way in which he speaks up. I was just revisiting Augustine's Confessions, and I like that he was corresponding with Saint Jerome, and of course it says Saint Augustine corresponded with Saint Jerome, but they were just Augustine and Jerome. They weren't Saint Augustine and Saint Jerome, but they are now. And I think we mustn't forget that is our destiny, that is our calling, that is what we were all created for, which is to be saints. And so we hope that we are in a time where we are seeing Saint Calvin and Saint Mark or Gavin or whoever, because it's not far-fetched. This is what we're called to do, and that's what we need to remember when we are facing these oppositions and asking, should we do what is right, or sorry, should we do what is nice and inclusive? If it's at the cost of what is right and true, we always have to put truth first. And so the talk of marriage there brings us to the second big story of the last week or so, which is that the German bishops and delegates voted in favour of providing blessings, ecclesiastical blessings, to same-sex relationships. 9 out of 58 opposed the motion, 11 abstained, and 38 voted in favour of blessing same-sex relationships. Again, Gavin, I know you've written about this, so share that with us.
I try and put myself in the position of the people who voted for it, because for 10 to 15 years, I would have been one of them. I had a very strong pastoral care for my gay friends. I lived in Brighton and worked there. And at the top of my list of hierarchical ethical values was care for the marginalized and the wounded. And that's a perfectly proper Christian ambition. But the problem is, and this is the difficulty that all ethical decision-making requires of us, when we find ourselves dealing with values that are conflicting each other, we have to choose one more than the other. And the value I think that the German bishops have forgotten, and all those who are voting to protect the marginalized have forgotten, is that of holiness. And so the whole of the Old Testament is an exploration in the creation of a people who were being invited to be holy. That's what it is, and it's seeped through every aspect of Jewish culture. And Jesus then takes this and deepens it, taking it beyond the cultic and the institutional and the regular into a complete remaking of the heart. And it's this business of holiness, as to move on from what you were saying, Catherine, that seems to escape the present generation. And there's a good reason for that. For the whole of my life, I've been bombarded by the neutrality of sexuality. Well, it's just a normative part of chimpanzee human beings' perfectly sensible aspiration. The failure to guard it and safeguard it and corral it has been hidden. But the damage from the sexual revolution in the last 50 years is really terrible. And the problem is that we're having an issue presented to us that caused a great deal of difficulty in the past, and that is that the surface language of presentation is really out of touch with the root, if you like, the foundational value it represents. And I thought the best way of describing this was by talking about the blessing of canons in the First World War. And the reason is this. I heard a lot of my gay friends say, rather polemically, in order to score a debating point, well, the church blesses cats and dogs. It blesses ships. It's even blessed cannons in the First World War. Can't it bless love? Surely it can stretch itself to move from cannons to love. And at first sight, that sounds like a very good argument. Yeah, it must. You know, if you can bless a canon that kills people, can you not bless a relationship where people care for each other? But the fact is that in the First World War, the blessing of canons was done for a series of reasons that appear to be Christian: nobility, self-sacrifice, love of nation, doing a duty, believing in something beyond yourself, good versus evil. But actually, the First World War was fought for a series of very nasty reasons: ultranationalism, economic greed, hatred of the European neighbor. And it was a complete disaster because all the Christian princes and nations fell upon each other and so destroyed each other that the people found it difficult to believe in a God who could allow that amount of slaughter. Now, this was justified by the gap between the presenting language of blessing canons and the real language of what was going on. And therefore, if you ever have that gap, you've got a problem. And my concern is that the gap between what the gay couples are asking for in terms of their blessing and what they actually represent in terms of Christian value and ethics is very large, and will have the same effect on demoralizing Christendom as as what happened when the gap led to the First World War. In other words, the relational anarchy that gay coupledom starts off, and soon moving, of course, to an enormous changeover in partners, and then polygamy and polyamory and the sexualization of children we've seen, is so dangerous to Christendom, and yet it's being presented to the German bishops in terms of, well, love is love. Can you not bless love? Is not as George Betting said, if someone comes to you and they say there's something good in our relationship, are you so dull that you can't see it's good and bless it? But the wool's being pulled over their eyes. And I can only think it's because of the propaganda that our generation has lived through. But actually, we have to pray for a renewal of Christian vision, a renewal of the hunger of holiness, and a renewal of discernment to be able to tell a presenting good from a real good. And at the moment, the German Catholic Church and its bishops seem unable to do that.
Mark, perhaps you could tell us what it is they mean by blessing, and maybe talk about invocatory and constituent blessings, and what it is that they voted in favour of and what's expected.
I don't think I can.
Good, because I couldn't.
Okay,
yeah.
well,
yeah, perhaps you can.
Well, so Gavin's drawn attention to the fact that as Catholics we bless rosary beads and we bless that. Well, you spoke about canons, perhaps that's a different. We'll leave that to one side. But what's actually happening in a blessing, and why is the church not permitted to bless same-sex relationships, and never will be? Which is why this is causing a potential schism.
Well, I suppose fundamentally, it's because we're back on this thing again, aren't we? We keep getting and it's kind of like, I suppose, because it's what's going on in the church. And yeah, I mean, if you read the document there, it's just, if you read the document they've promulgated, have you read it? It's absolute barking. And I can't help but feel that it's like they've lost interest in what the church teaches, and instead they've adopted, secular morale. Like they're just doing what they're saying in the document. They're saying science, but they're leaving out huge swaths of the scientific evidence. They're leaving out any sort of idea of, what happens to people who aren't happy when they're assigned a different gender afterwards, and they're very subjectively quoting things, like they're quoting Pope Francis in Fratelli Tutti and saying, we have to reach out and try and be friends with everyone else as justification for what they're doing. But they're leaving out, other things. Like, for example, in 2016, he said, in a conversation with some Polish bishops, he said, today children are taught in school that everyone can choose his or her sex. Why are they teaching this? Because the books are provided by the people and institutions that give you the money. These forms of ideological colonization are also supported by influential countries, and this is terrible. Well, they don't quote that of German bishops. They just quote in things that they think will, and we see this all the time. It's so frustrating, and it lacks any sort of intellectual integrity. And that really worries me, that we're just as the world is becoming more ideological, we see the church becoming incredibly partisan and ideological, and people aren't prepared to have good conversations and good disagreements. They're just constantly pushing their own side of the argument. I mean, you could even see it in the way that watching what's been going on in America with the American bishops, who are basically in open warfare at the moment, and you've got the progressives who are only writing in America or National Catholic Reporter, and then you've got the Orthodox who are writing in First Things and National Catholic Register, and you've got it's even like the publications are even divided and ideologically divided. And I suppose we've always had that sort of divide, but the National Catholic Register, for example, was actually written to by the US bishops a few years ago and told to drop the name Catholic because it wasn't Catholic in any way, shape, or form. How do we get out of this spiral? It just feels like we're in a spiral, doesn't it, with it all? Unless the Pope stands up and tells them to.
I think one of the ways we get out of this.
I think there's a bit of a delay there.
There is. I'm so sorry. We're talking across each other. 30 seconds from me. One of the ways we get out of this spiral is doing what we're doing. Part of the reason, the rationale for Catholic Unscripted is that we want, as 3 lay people, to say this is the magisterium, this is the faith we've inherited, and we are sufficiently engaged and experienced to be able to stand up and articulate it. And if for any reason that our bishops can't, some reasons that may be good, people have been saying that the Ordinariate is trying to escape the gaze of Mordor and doesn't want to draw attention to itself in case something happens to it. It doesn't matter whether it's good or bad. There are others, we amongst them, who are willing to articulate what the faith is, and that's why we're doing what we're doing.
Yeah, the problem here is the redefinition of marriage. The problem with blessing and asking the church to bless gay couples is that it's this idea of setting something aside as sacred to be used for sacred purposes. The church cannot bless a gay relationship, set it aside as holy to be used for that relationship to be holy, because the sexual acts between man and man, woman and woman, are not holy, so they cannot be. Or you might bless to help you accomplish some activity. Again, I mean, lay people will say blessings, bless other people, and bless over their food, but this isn't the blessing that they're asking for. They're asking the church to be involved in that blessing, to set that relationship apart as holy. That's what they're asking. That's what that would entail, and the church simply cannot do it. It never will be able to. It doesn't have permission to. It cannot change, and so this pressure coming to bear will get nowhere. And all that's really required is, and I think Pope Francis has already made this clear, might be a bit strong, but but has said this, that basically they're heading towards schism. It's not going to change. It doesn't matter how many people vote for it, how many bishops vote for it. The church will never be able to bless gay relationships. But so this book, by the way, anyone interested, is very, very good. It's What is Marriage? There we go, by Man and Woman, A Defense, by Sheriff Gergis and Ryan Anderson. And it says here, now this isn't necessarily looking at religious objections, but it says our essential claims may be put succinctly. There's a distinct form of personal union and corresponding way of life, historically called marriage, whose basic features do not depend on the preferences of individuals or cultures. Marriage is, of its essence, a comprehensive union, a union of will by consent and body by sexual union, inherently ordered to procreation and thus the broad sharing of family life, and calling for permanent and exclusive commitment, whatever the spouse's preferences. It has long been and remains a personal and social reality, sought and prized by individuals, couples, and whole societies. But it is also a moral reality, a human good with an objective structure, which it is inherently good for us to live out. Marriages have always been the main and most effective means of rearing healthy, happy, and well-integrated children. It goes on and finishes here. Redefining marriage in the public mind bodes ill for the common good. Indeed, societies mindful of this fact need deprive no same-sex attracted people of practical goods, social equality, or personal fulfillment. It's not that the church is saying people in same-sex relationships can carry on and do whatever they do, which they do, and may want to leave property to one another. The civil laws are a separate matter, but the church cannot bless relationships, set them apart, when marriage means something that cannot be redefined. It means something that gay relationships cannot fulfill. It's as simple as that.
It's an abandonment of the natural law, isn't it? And
Completely.
it's important that when we talk about natural law, we're not talking about the law of nature. We're talking about the obvious order of the universe. There's no getting away from the fact that children come from one man and one woman. And the fact that we're even considering this or talking about it in this day and age is quite shocking, really, isn't it? And it worries me for the future of society, really.
Yeah. Yeah, it really worries me too. Gavin, does it worry you?
It does worry me. I've been trying to think of a concise way of explaining what I think is the bigger issue, the principle behind this. There was a very, very funny takedown, pro-gay takedown of the Old Testament, and in mocking the fact that there was slavery and that polyester shirts are a breaking of the law, and that there are so many ways in which our present society breaks the cultic and ceremonial and ritual and dietary laws of the Old Testament. Why have Christians taking this one thing and making a stand about it? And so we could answer that, but there's a broader question, which is the training of the Old Testament was in the distinguishing between holy and unholy, between sacred and profane. And it wasn't at all clear why God should say these things are holy and these things aren't. There's some common sense things like you're not to marry women of foreign tribes. And then it was explained because actually they'll influence you to go and follow their gods, and you'll bring up your children following false gods. So, don't do it. It's an unholy thing to do it. And there were some very severe consequences from time to time when people did do it. But the whole of the Old Testament, both in terms of sex and diet and agriculture, was a distinction between the two ways of doing things, one holy and one profane. And it underlay something that becomes more clear as Christians, which is our capacity to distinguish between good and evil. So you might say holy and profane stand for the difference between good and evil. And the great damage with inclusion and relativity is that it robs the whole church of any sense of this need to distinguish and the capacity to distinguish, which Jesus shows is at the heart of his mission in Matthew 25. There will come a day when all the nations are brought before me, and I will separate the sheep from the goats. The great moment in the last judgment will be precisely this separation, but incarnated in human life and human moral choices. For us to give the sense that just because it's sex and emotion and romance, there is no longer any need to make a distinction between good and evil, between holy and unholy, is a betrayal of everything that the gospel is about, everything that Jesus came to do, which is to save us from evil. And perhaps this greatest gift of the Holy Spirit after love, which is the capacity to tell a difference between good and evil. It's a gift I've been praying for the whole of my life, and I'm very bad at it. But I know that the whole church is very bad at it. The discernment of spirits, St. Ignatius of Loyola was extremely keen on, in using his exercises, putting the discernment of spirits right at the heart of the whole process of Christian renewal. That's what's abandoned when you stop making the distinctions that both the Old Testament in practice and the New Testament in principle invite us to live out, and doing what you have to do if you decide that same-sex relationships are no different in ontology and quality from straight ones, and that is produce a relativistic worldview where you stop bothering to tell the difference between good and evil.
Mm.
Well, I think
Not gay people.
I'm really struggling. Go on. I was going to say I'm really struggling to articulate that. It's not about like sort of what you're saying there is really important, and it's not about it doesn't mean that we don't gay people exist, get over it sort of thing. Yeah, fine, we do, but the quality of that relationship, the quality of the relationship between two men and two women, it's a different thing, And I'm not saying that they don't love each other, or like before we get into that, that's not really what I'm trying to say. But it's like a man and a woman coming together to have children and raise a family. That is a unique and special and amazing thing. And it's a different thing. It's just a different thing, isn't it?
And okay, just for the purpose of clarification, everything I've said applies to straight people living together outside marriage. It's not just same sex. It's the fact that it's marriage, and marriage becomes this, as Catholic, well, she defined it earlier, it doesn't need repeating. And so the real problem in our society is not with gay people, it's actually with straight people who decline to commit themselves to each other for life, decline to give their parents the stability of two parents, decline to put fidelity before comfort and convenience. All the gay people have done is to learn from this and to say, well, can we have be cut a bit of slack as well? Unfortunately, in terms of the accusation of homophobia, the campaign has concentrated on gay people. We're not being attacked by secularists over people living together in sin. Otherwise, we'd be fighting the battle there. We happen to be attacked on the issue of gay marriage. So that's why we're fighting the battle. It's not homophobia. We do exactly the same thing when it comes down to heterosexual patterns of indiscriminate sexual amorousness that leads to the having of children outside stable, committed, lifelong relationships.
Yeah, I think
I found that in a face-to-face discussion about it, that's quite disarming. If you can say to someone, well, yeah, I think gay sex is a sin, but I also think masturbation's a sin, or fornication's a sin. You know, like any activity outside of the procreative act, that's sinful, because that's sort of what we believe. It doesn't mean that we're perfect, but it means that we're aspiring to something holy.
And the oh goodness, I've forgotten. Wait, it'll come back. It's gone. I hate this. Right, Alzheimer's cracks in. Catherine, you go. wait. It was no, it's gone completely. Oh yes, no, I got it. So the very people who say to us, is sex outside marriage, or is homosexual sex a sin, are inviting us to dig a hole into which we throw ourselves by being condemnatory. If you were to say to them in debate or questioning, well, do you believe in the concept of sin? In other words, do you believe that there's a holy God who distinguishes between sacred and profane? They'll say, no, we don't. In which case, well, don't ask us to pronounce on a category that you don't believe in. It doesn't matter. You know, you're just trying to trap us. So of course we shouldn't use the language of sin to people who don't believe in sin. It's just an attempt to get us to make fool of ourselves and to appear to be condemnatory. I think we have to say to people who ask us that question, tell us how you manage your own hierarchy of ethical values. And then in that hierarchy, perhaps we can place the thing that we're talking about to see where it fits. I mean, for example, at the top of the hierarchy might be the welfare of children, in which case depriving children of fathers and having multiple partners isn't good for children. That's what we Christians mean by sin, but you've probably got another word for it, like disorder or chaos or anarchy or screwed up children, whatever word you like. But don't force us to use the word sin. We'll use your word instead, and perhaps that way we can convince you there's some reality in our ethical hierarchical values.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, is to get that dialogue down to the natural law, because we're all human at the end of the day. And what Mark was saying about feelings is we have to try and enter into a rational and reasonable conversation with people about what marriage actually is, and say, well, what logically follows if we say it's just about feelings?
I think I want to say our passion for trying to articulate vision. That doesn't mean we consider ourselves successful practitioners. We're all of us flawed. And in fact, sometimes it's the flawed people who are most passionate about the vision, because we realize that without the vision, we really are sunk, left to our own frailties and temptations and fallibilities. So this to have a passion for the vision is not by implication to say that we are the people who can deliver the vision and know how to do it. On the contrary, sometimes the relationship between our passion and the vision is precisely the gap we feel between aspiration and performance. So we're not telling people we're better than them. We're saying we've seen the way to go. It's a very narrow road and the cliff is steep either side. try and keep the narrow road because people fall off the cliff and get damaged. But it's very difficult to articulate the vision without appearing to be holier than thou, in a way that we're not.
Yeah, I mean, and I am a stepmother, and I love my stepchildren very much, and we have a good relationship, and things are as good as they could be, but they are nonetheless, there is damage along the way, where broken relationships and broken families, there's no getting away from that. And so quite rightly, Gavin, there's no sense in which we're speaking from this place of we do everything right and you guys need to as well. It's recognizing the reality of how things are, recognizing the hurt and the pain, and saying, we've lived it as well, but we see that then assenting to these truths is really the only way to bring that healing. And why is it the only way? Because God's the creator of life, the author of life. Who knows best what's best for us than God? It's not a group, it's not a committee sitting around, because a lot of things appear on the face of it, these apparent goods that you talked about, the difference between real and apparent goods. There are many things that appear to be good. We can all say that. Just recently, there was there's quite often news stories about the contraceptive pill. We're 50 years down from that, and we know the reality of the effects of the pill, and they were not expected. They're unexpected. It was expected that all these wonderful things would happen as a result of the pill. We're now seeing the degradation of society, the use of women as objects, not to mention, as a separate aside, the health impacts on both on our bodies and also the impact on the environment. But the church, of course, because it's the church and it's which Christ established, prophesied that these would be the effects of the contraceptive pill, and indeed they are. So it may not seem obvious to us, but as Catholics, we can say we trust the church that Christ instituted, that Christ's body, who is the head of the church. We trust it, which is also why it can't be changed on a whim in the world that we live in, which will be a different world in 50 years and was a different world 50 years ago. And the church is that rock that we turn to. We ask it to change us. We don't change it.
I really like that. Only this week in the newspaper, I've been reading about the new studies that have talked about the prevalence of breast cancer amongst women who've taken the pill. I certainly thought when I was a Protestant that the Pope and the whole Catholic Church was dreadfully mistaken over its opposition to contraception. But when you look at the levels of the female hormone that have been pissed into the waters that make our fish infertile, and perhaps affect the testosterone levels of men, it's so great is the toxicity of it. To say nothing of the cancers, to say nothing of the removal of the consequences of sexual behavior. It's now perfectly obvious 50 or 60 years later that there was an enormous problem with the pill. And as you say, the church said this category is wrong. Out of this mistaken category, good will not come. And we're saying the same thing about same-sex marriage.
Yeah, and of course, the reason women shouldn't take the pill isn't because you want to avoid breast cancer, although it does look like it's causing breast cancer, and it isn't because of the water, although that's terrible. These are effects, but the problem is that it's about how it causes us to look at one another, how it causes us to see one another as objects of use and not objects of love. And so those other things are important, but they're not the reason why we shouldn't use contraception. But then we're moving into contraception, which is another huge topic. So perhaps for this evening, we'll wrap it up there. Mark, what do you think?
I agree with everything. I think it's interesting that I think it was in his interview with Boris that Calvin brought it back to that, where he's obviously coming from an Anglican perspective, but he agrees with the fact that the whole breakdown came from the acceptance. All the Christian churches were against contraception, and then there was that breakthrough at the Lambert conference in 1936 or something, wasn't it? And that's like the watershed moment, wasn't it, where everything's fallen apart from there. And I mean, it makes perfect sense if you're going to say that, if you're going to separate the two, the procreative and the unitive ends, and say that sex is just as it's equally important for jollies as it is for anything else. Well, then how do you? What do you think? As soon as you take away the procreation, then But the fact of the matter is the consequence of sexual intercourse between a man and a woman is children.
Yeah.
You know, that is its function, its purpose, and that's what it does.
That's what
And
happens when you have sex, people. Just in case you weren't sure.
In case you're wondering what's doing it.
How did this happen?
Yeah.
No, it's true. It's absolutely true. I heard someone once say, and I thought at the time they're quite right, and I've thought it ever since, that if you can get young people to see why artificial contraception is wrong, why contraception is wrong, then everything else will fall into place. They will understand why marriage must be between a man and a woman, lifelong, exclusive, and I think that's quite true. And actually, I've seen it happen. I've seen young people, the ball, you know, the penny drops, and they say, "I get it. I get contraception," and then other things follow. So absolutely, it should go back to that, and that needs to be addressed. Yeah. Well,
I kind of feel there's a real platonic theme to our whole discussion here, but continuing that platonic theme in this vein, I would say that that's one of the most beautiful things about being a parent and being a catechist, isn't it? It's holding up that ideal and saying, look, this is what we're aiming for: the good, the true, and the beautiful. And you know, why shouldn't we want integrity? Why shouldn't we want honor? Why shouldn't we want young men to cherish and respect young women? And you know, that's what we should be aiming for, I think.
I think you're right. And I don't want you to go, even though I said I've got to be quick tonight, because you have just reminded me of the most beautiful, I mean, I could read this whole book, but the most beautiful little short, say where you are, everyone. Don't go anywhere. Passage from Peter Kreeft, and it's called Why You're Here. Gavin, say something.
Say something intelligent, Gavin.
Come on, Gavin.
While you look it up, you mean?
Exactly. Yeah, get on.
Yes, okay. Well, I want to say that Peter Kreeft is absolutely brilliant, and I'm just hugely impressed. And whenever you point us to salient things that he said, both my mind is clearer and my heart is fuller. Have you found it yet, Catherine?
No, you're doing a really good job, though. So
is it in the letters? I won't. Is it letters before I go, or whatever it is?
Yeah, do you know, it's one of those things I always see. And then when you try and oh, here it is. Oh, I've got to read it. Sorry to test your patience, everyone, but this is so beautiful. Listen to this. It's called Why You Exist. By you here, I don't mean 6 or 7 billion human beings, but you, my 4 absolutely unique individual children. I think you should know why you exist. I'd be a robber if I didn't give you that information. You exist because your mother and I said yes to God many years ago. We said to God, be God, do your thing, create. Give yourself the children you want. We want them too. Use us as your instruments. We will not block your way. And when we said that to God, God said to us, I will create them, and you will procreate them. I will love them into existence, and I will use your 2 lovings to do that. I will make a John, a Jenny, a Catherine, and an Elizabeth. And I will also make 2 others, whom I will take straight to heaven before they can be born into your world. So that you will indeed have the 6 children you dreamed of and asked me for, but in a better way than you had thought. But you will not and cannot see how my way was better than yours. As long as you are in the land of shadows, you just have to trust me. Whatever children you have, do to them what I do to you. Tell them why they exist. It's because you let God have his way. Because whenever we do that, great things happen, like you.
Beautiful.
Just beautiful, isn't it? I was choking up a bit there.
Right,
it's just so beautiful. Yeah, so the church is right. In fact, don't bother with Unscripted. The church is right. It's all in there. You don't need us. Okay, should we call it a day?
Yeah, why not?
Okay, all right. Well, thank you for watching and listening. I'm Catherine Bennett.
I'm Mark Lambert.
I'm Gavin Ashenden. Holy Week next week. God bless you. Happy Easter when it comes, in case we can't get one up before then.